So you've made the incredible decision to join the Dragon Battle Animation Masterclass. The decision that you've made here today is going to shape your career and the rest of your future as an animator. You've made an incredible decision here, and you're going to be learning how to create epic dragon battle animations. And it's something that's very intricate, very difficult to pull off, but I'm going to make it very easy to understand. I'm going to be very thorough, but I'm also going to be very concise with the information that I give you. I'm going to show you my methodology, my tips, my tricks, my workflow, how to make something that's so complicated very, very easy, and we're going to elevate your skills to the next level for the rest of your career. With all that being said, I don't want to hold you for too long. Let's jump into the class and begin the Dragon Battle Animation Masterclass. I'll see you on the other side. Hello class, you've all waited long enough, so let's begin the Dragon Battle Animation Masterclass. So as you know by now, what we're going to be breaking down is this shot right here of these two dragons fighting. And I'm going to explain basically everything that went into making this shot, thoughts, considerations, workflow methods, everything. So without further ado, let's begin. So now that we're in Maya, you can see here that, what my initial setup looks like. I've got two dragon rigs here. I've got a controller, well basically just a NURBS controller that has keys on it. I've got a sphere that also has keys on it, and I've got another sphere that also has keys on it. I'm going to explain what that is. So when you're creating a dynamic action shot, and this works for animation visual effects, and anybody that's worked in movies would know this as well, there's many ways you can go about creating an action shot. The traditional method is to create storyboards. So you draw out the frames or the key poses and then add like notes with them onto a dope sheet, and by doing so, when the animator is going to animate it, they know exactly what it is that they need to animate, and they're able to fill in the blanks basically. But the storyboard is going to be detailed enough that they're not going to be lost in terms of what directions take the character's personality, the exact movements that's going to happen. That's all laid out in advance. So then all that the animator has to do is animate based upon the storyboard. You can take a storyboard a step further by turning it into a video, which is known as an animatic. And all that is basically taking the storyboard and make it into a video so that the animator is able to get the timing and the pacing that the director, the animation supervisor, or whoever it is wants. It's very simple. So then all that happens is that you basically have the entire shot or the film completely laid out on paper, and the animator just animates it. That's one way of working, but the problem and downside with that is that it's very time consuming. And I'm just going to speak about myself personally. When I come up with an idea of an animation, I already have a good idea of what it is that I want in my head, but I need to just visualize it very quickly so that I'm able to make alterations on it or just see if it's a good idea or not, because I don't want to spend hours and hours and hours, maybe even days and weeks planning out a storyboard, turning it into an animatic, and then when I look at the final product, I don't like the idea. That it just ends up being a big waste of time, which is why I came up with this method. And this method is what I like to call the scene layout method. And you can see I've even titled that here. When you look at the title, it says initial setup dragons fight scene layout. And the way that the layout scene works, as you can see on screen, is that I take basic geometry that is meant to be representative of the characters that I have in question. In this case, I'm going to have two dragons, and the spheres are going to be representative of the two dragons. So the textures that I have for them are, one is orange, one is green, which I then later changed to blue, but that's neither here nor there. So you can see we've got our orange dragon right here. And then if I turn on the textures, you're going to get our green dragon here as well. So cool. All these spheres is to represent what this character is. Of course, you can go a little bit more detailed with this by creating some planes and adding some extra flaps that would be wings. But for the purpose of this, I didn't need to, and I wanted to keep it as simple as possible and just get down to animating. So as you saw in the final scene, the dragons are going to be clashing and there's going to be a lot of interacting, and that's going to be very difficult to deal with. So how did I manage that? Like I said, the scene layout method just allows me to get my ideas down very quickly. So I'm going to press play and you're going to see what happens. So you can see here that what's basically happening. So let's go back to the beginning. The dragons come together, they clash, they split apart after twirling around in the air, like clashing, and then they separate in the air like that. They settle, they circle around each other like that, and then they clash, and then they hit the floor, they bounce to a settle. Now let's take a look at what that looks like in terms of the final product, because what you're going to notice is that it's not very different. of course, they bounce quite far here. But if we go back to Keyframe Pro and we just play the animation, what do we see? They fly up into the air, they separate. We're going to switch the camera around. They're going to circle. One flies up, one dives down, they clash, they hit the floor, and that's the end of the fight scene. So you see, going from the initial layout pass to the final production didn't change very much. In terms of the general action, it's still exactly the same. So this is why the layout method is actually a very good one to use, especially when you want to get your ideas down fast, and you can then iterate upon it as you're going through your animation. The only downside to this method is that it lacks detail. So there will be key bits of information that you're going to be missing. So for example, how do you know what the weight of your dragons is going to be based on just these two spheres? Ultimately, you don't. You're going to have good fundamentals in terms of animation. So this method can work, but it's going to require you to have solid fundamentals. That's probably the only downside to it. So you can see here that when we get to the very end and where the dragons bounce, they actually travel quite far. And in the final production, or the final animation, I should say, they don't travel as far. And that's because my dragons, I've decided to give them significantly more weight than is representative of these two spheres. Alright, but that moves me on to my next point. The next thing I'm going to talk about is how I manage the scene, because that is a doozy in and of itself. Alright, so what I'm going to do to kind of show you the gravity of what I had to deal with when I was making the animations for this, let me turn on all of the controls. Okay, so you can see here we've got a lot of controls happening. In fact, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to go to the final shot, so the final animation. Where are you? And we're going to load that up. And I'm going to show you how complicated everything looks, so you can get a grasp of what the final animation looks. And then I'm going to go reverse engineer it and show you how I managed to make the animation with all of that stuff in mind. Alright, so let me get that out of here. Ignore the camera. So now let's look at what everything looks like. Now this is a complete mess. How do you manage this? So you can see here we've got one dragon biting the other's neck, clawing at it at the same time. The legs are all interacting. There's going to be clipping. There's going to be wing controls to deal with. This is a lot. And in fact, it's not even showing all the controls. I actually wasn't showing most of the green dragon's controls. So let's just take a look at this. Look at this. There's no way that you're going to be able to manage that in any good way. So let's turn off the controls. You can see what it ends up looking like. There we go. We play that through again, like that. And there it is. We'll go through it one more time. We'll turn on the controls now so you can kind of see what's going on. See, it's a complete mess. How would you deal with that? The good thing is, you don't have to answer that question. I'm going to tell you. Alright, so this is, when it comes to creating a complex dragon fight scene animation like this, one thing you need to do is you need to organize yourself and plan ahead. It's vitally important. So when I'm talking about planning ahead, I'm talking about managing your rigs. So as I said before, these rigs are extremely complicated. There's a lot of controls, and when they're going to interact, it's going to be incredibly difficult to deal with. And you want to make use of Maya's display layers, and you want to make use of selection sets. If you don't do this, you're going to create more work for yourself than necessary. So how did I divide this up? Like I showed you in the previous Maya file, I had one dragon be distinguished by color. So both dragons are distinguished by color. One is orange, one is green, which I later changed to blue. So you can see here, I've divided the controls into what I call tiers. And these tiers are primary, secondary, and tertiary controls. And how do I define what control goes into what category? That's actually quite easy for me to explain. I'm going to use this dragon here as an example, and I believe this is the green one. So this right here is what the entire dragon rig looks like. By itself, it's complicated, it's heavy, but it's not too complicated. Everything on the rig makes perfect sense. It's actually made very, very well. So you can see here, you know, you've got fat controls here, and then you've got all these other controls. I'm not going to go through all of them. That's something that you can do yourself. So what I'm going to break down for you though is how I define what classes as a primary, a secondary, or tertiary control. Let's begin with the primary controls. And I'm going to start off by turning off everything else. Turn off tertiary, turn off secondary, turn off extra, and we're just going to keep the primary controls. So in terms of the primary controls, you can still see that there's quite a lot, but all of the extra stuff has been turned off. Now, to answer the question directly, what defines a primary control? For me, a primary control is a thing that allows you to block out more or less the entire animation. No detail, just be able to block out everything. So, the leg movement. I have the IK control here, which allows me to control that. And then, you know, rotate that as such, etc, etc. These controls here, these neck ones, are going to allow me to control the neck / the head. So I can move that there. I can then rotate it like so. And even these here, I can then do that. I can rotate that like so. I've got the jaw control here, just the main jaw. And I can rotate that like that. The wings, I kept the green dragon's wings in FK, and I'll explain about that in a little bit. But you can see here, that controls that. And then I've got some clavicle controls here, just to help with just deformations. I've got the main hips here. So all of the hip controls I've left there, like that. Then I've got this, which is going to allow me to control the dragon's tilt. Really useful stuff. So just main things that are going to allow me to control that. And some of these controls, honestly, I would have hidden as well. But the reason I didn't hide them is because when you hide something in my display layers that are part of a group, you're going to end up hiding everything that's underneath it as well. So there's actually even some controls in the primary layer that I would just hide and not use. So for example, this, I would have hidden it. I would have realistically just kept this control here, like this one with the arrows here, that's controlling the main action of the hips, like that. And I would have taken this here to control the pelvis, like that. And I would have just kept this one here as well, just to control, you know, the main tilt action there. Anyways, so, and obviously I've got the tail controls here, which is just basically an FK tail. So if I just grab that and grab that, you can see I can just control the tail there. Let me turn, no, actually I'll leave that alone. Okay, so you can see when I'm talking about the primary controls, what I define as primary controls are the things that are going to allow me to block out the main action. What controls are necessary for me to manipulate and move the main parts of the body. And that's how I define the primary controls. So you can see here that in this rig in particular, I've got these controls here. These controls I would not have used, but the way that the rig is set up is that if I hide this, you notice how it's hidden the other control as well. So if you press H inside of Maya, as you know, you hide whatever you have selected. So if I hide it, notice what it's done. It's hidden the main head control. That's just something that's going to cause a problem. So I've had to leave these controls here, even though I don't animate them. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But you see, that's how I've divided the primary controls. Enough with the primary controls. Let's move on to the secondary controls. Secondary controls. So secondary controls for me is just going to be things that support the main action. So these are going to be things like, oh, you know, if I want to add some details, like let's talk about the wing fingers. Those are things I'm going to add as secondary controls. The toes, those are things I'm going to add as secondary controls. I've got these here as well, but I wouldn't have them realistically. And it's just anything that's going to support the main action and just add a little bit more detail. So now we're going to move on to tertiary controls. What are class as tertiary controls? So tertiary controls. Tertiary controls are going to be things that are just going to add just that extra level of detail to the character. So things like the fin controls here, like this. Things like jiggle controls, like that. Anything that's going to control fat or anything like that. And even the membrane controls that are here as well. Hold on, let me select that properly. So even the membrane controls, things like that. Those are things I would class as tertiary controls. Then you have extra controls. And extra controls are going to be things that are going to allow you to, like, you know, automate things. So, you know, I've got like my FK, IK switch controls here. So you can see I can change from FK to IK. I'm going to hide those. Anything that's going to control, like, you know, multiple things at a time. So like just multi-function controls, things that are going to control bend and curve. Things like this, where if I was to grab them or grab the points on this, notice how it manipulates that part of the wing. Those are extra controls, things that are going to be quite distracting. and ultimately not going to help me when I'm just starting the initial stage of animation. And then you've got things like this, which is going to be like, you know, auto curl controls, things like that. And yeah, and then even things like this, ones that control the fins. So if I go to, you know, this, oops, let's go on the other side so you can actually see that. If I go under here and I do that, you see that that animates and controls that. So I have that in extra controls as well. It's just extra stuff that's going to allow me to just have better control and greater level of detail. So that's what I advise that you do. I advise that you take the controls of both of these dragons and you separate them into display layers so that you can optimally turn things on and off, so that when you're actually animating and you get to a stage where you're like, let's go here. Yeah, where they're intertwined and whatever, you can just turn off things that you don't need and just animate exactly what you need. So say for example, I wanted to animate just the orange dragon, but I need to see the green dragon's mesh so that I can make it interact properly. You go with let's just go with orange primary controls. Give it a second. See, it's still quite a mess, but this is something that you're better able to work with. And then let's say you don't need that and you need the secondary controls now. You can turn on the secondary controls, and then you can turn off the primary controls, and you can just work with that and get your shapes and everything that you need. What you can also do as well, and this is something that I actually did, is you create selection sets. There's a bit of a problem though, is that because these two rigs are the same, if you create selection sets for one, it's going to pick up the names of the other one as well, because the names are going to be the same. So how do you deal with that? You have to go into the actual rig file, make a copy of it, and change the reference. So what do I mean by that? So if I go to file and I go to reference editor, you can see here that the original name of the rig is actually called the Tyrant rig, but you can see here that I've got the Tyrant rig underscore green, and then I got the orange version as well. So what I've done is I've actually gone into my files and I've created copies of these rigs. So let me show you exactly what it is that I mean. So let's bring this over here so you can see what I'm talking about. So we're going to go to Advanced Animation Academy, course materials. Then we're going to go to rigs, go all the way to the Tyrant Dragon rig, because that's what it originally was named. You see I've made a copy called underscore orange and a copy called underscore green, and this is the original rig. So why did I make copies of the rig? Because I needed the rigs to have differences in terms of the names, so that when I create the selection set, that it doesn't conflict, so that when I select, let's say, the wing fingers of the green one in the selection set, it doesn't automatically select the wing fingers of the orange one, and vice versa. So that's why you need to take the time to set up your rigs properly. So let me talk about selection sets. Animbot has a really, really good function when it comes to selection sets. You're able to color code them and just basically label out all the things that you need. So if I was to quickly turn on all the orange dragon controls, where are you? We go tertiary, and we're going to turn on the primary as well. All right. So say I wanted just, you know, the left wing fingers. I select them, I've got them, just like that. I want the right foot. I select it, I've got it, and I can just begin manipulating it and moving it. And vice versa. I've got everything like wing all, left foot, blah, 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 blah. And what I've done is I've mirrored the selection set for the green one. So if I was to select, let's say, the wing fingers of the green one, you can see that it's going to be over here. I just haven't shown it yet in the viewport, but it's selecting just those. Because if I didn't do this, what would happen is if I selected the green or the orange one, it would select the left wing fingers of both rigs, because the two dragons are the same. And what I've done for my own visual reference is I've color coded them. So every selection set that is in orange references the orange dragon, and every reference that is in green, every selection set and control that's meant to be for the green dragon is green to represent that dragon. Very simple. Just take some planning ahead, and these are the kind of things that are going to allow you to stay organized and not get lost when you're creating an animation like this. So now I need to talk to you about handling the rotations, because one of the most complicated things that you can see in this shot is all of the rotations that are going on between the two dragons. So like when they're going up here, then they separate. You can imagine, like, look at this. Let's just go through this and let's just count the amount of 360 that there are. So the two dragons start off like this. Just pay attention to this one. I'm going to highlight this one. They clash, spin over each other once, twice, does that, and this one even does an extra flip, and then They go around each other, they come up, they do this again, and then they rotate again, rotate again, rotate again, hit the ground. That is a lot of rotations. And as an animator yourself, if you know anything about rotations, you know that when you accumulate rotations like that on top of each other and going in multiple directions, you are inevitably going to encounter the dreaded gimbal lock. So, and if you do that, you basically mess up your entire animation, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, you can try to change the rotation order, put it onto a locator and try to fix it that way. But there's a way that you can avoid that from the very beginning if you just put some thought and foreplannning into it. And this kind of brings me back to the original layout scene. So I'm going to quickly save this. We don't really need to, I didn't change anything. So I'm going to quickly save this. I'm going to jump back to the initial layout scene, and I'm going to show you how I managed to eliminate the problems that would be presented with gimbal lock from the get-go. So let me show you exactly what that is. So let's go to our initial setup. So now we are back to our initial layout scene, and I just realized something as well. When I was talking about the display layers, you wasn't able to see them because my face is in the way. So let me take myself off camera because I'm not needed here. And I'm going to talk about the display layers really quickly. I'm not going to go through them all over again, but you can see what I'm talking about. I've divided them into primary, secondary, and then tertiary controls, like so. So you can see that right there. And so we're going to go through that again. So just look at all the controls and how complex the rig is, just like that. I'm going to turn off the tertiary controls. Actually, let me turn on the extra controls as well so you can see what I'm talking about. So all the extra controls, so it looks like that. Turn off the extra controls. You can see it's like that. Turn off the tertiary controls. It's like that. Turn off the secondary controls. And then turn off the primary controls and vice versa. So yeah, you can see that I've just done that to just keep myself organized. All right. So as I was saying before, when it comes to dealing with the rotations and just ensuring that I don't get gimbal lock, because the dreaded gimbal lock, you don't want to deal with that. What you want to do is in the scene layout, you need to plan ahead. I knew from the get-go I wanted the dragons to clash together and basically look like a ball of wings, and just basically look like a ball of pain essentially, and wings flapping and just complete chaos. And the reason for that is because when you look at birds fighting or flying creatures fighting and battling for resources, it looks like a complete mess, and I wanted to replicate that with these dragons. So then I'm going to show you some reference that I came across from Game of Thrones and then from real life birds as well. So let me pull that up right now and show you. So where are you? You should be over here. So yep, there it is. So let's drag that over here, and I want to look at basically Pixmodo's dragon fight reference. So let's have a look at that. So this is the animation that was actually done for the Game of Thrones battle for the dragons when they were basically in Winterfell above the castle, and it was the Night King versus Jon Snow and Daenerys. So with all that in mind, let's just take a look at what that looks like. So this was the scene, and as you know, it was completely dark and you was barely able to see anything of the dragons. When they released the VFX basically breakdown for it, you was finally able to see most of the animation. So now let's have a look at what that looks like. Obviously, they're going to cut to the actual thing that they showed in the TV show, but ultimately, this is what it ends up looking like. So the animation is incredible. Like when you actually sit down and look at it here and break it down, the animation is incredible. And of course, they've cheated in some aspects, but that's completely natural because they already know what kind of camera angles that they want to go for. But ultimately, the animation itself still looks very, very good. And although there's a lot of intricate action, it's still representative of what you see when you see birds and other flying creatures fight. It just looks like a ball of pain, and it looks very scrappy and very hard to distinguish what's going on. But the main thing that they've done different here is that they've slowed down all the movement, and they've made the wing flaps and the movements very deliberate because these dragons are very, very heavy. They contain a lot of mass, and as we know, when it comes to creating things that look heavy and have mass and making it believable, their movements need to look slow and deliberate. So that's what they've done with these dragons here, and it's actually incredible what they've done. So let me show you what that looks like when you look at birds in comparison that are having fights as well. So for this, we can quite literally just go to YouTube and just, if you just type in like birds fighting, you will see like this is the kind of motion that you get. It's very difficult to make out. You can see that they're clawing at each other with their feet, and their wings are just basically trying to keep them stabilized, and it's just basically a ball of mess. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to create that chaotic feeling while also having the same weight and control that the dragons had. So if I just go backwards and I click on another one, we'll look at another example really quick. You can see, even though these ones are quite stationary and they're on the ground, when they do start moving, it's very erratic and it's very difficult to see what's going on. So these are very small and very light creatures, so you want to slow it down. And then we'll find one more example just for the sake of showing an example and some reference. So this one's quite slowed down. But ultimately, you get the idea. The idea is that it looks like a complete mess, and it's just basically a giant. I wanted to create the feeling of chaotic and a giant ball of pain. And when I saw the Game of Thrones reference, or the animation rather, the VFX breakdown, it inspired me to create this shot. So when I look at that, I wanted to add my own animation knowledge, my own creativity to that. So I just looked at reference from like birds fighting and that, and I took it from there. The rest is history. All right, so what I'm going to do really quick, I'm going to go back to, where are you? Go back to Maya and talk about how you actually handle that practically, because it's great having reference and an idea, but how on earth do you replicate that? Cool. Let's talk about that, exactly how we did that. So because I knew that I wanted to create the scene layout, I knew from the get-go that I wanted to avoid gimbal lock. Just experience has taught me that, you know, if I'm going to have this many rotations, I'm going to encounter gimbal lock. So I need to avoid it. So the way that I did that was I just animated this control here. I made this control most of the rotations. Most of the rotations going up. So in terms of actual motion, if I was to delete this, look what the animation looks like. Oops, let me undo that. I'm going to have to take it out of the group. Then I'm going to take these out. I'm going to plonk them there. And then let's look at what the animation looks like. So you can see, in terms of movement, this here controls quite a lot. It controls the way that they spin when they clash. It controls the way that they clash again and spin when they go down, and that's it. Sorry, I said that wrong. It controls the way that they go up and spin. It controls the way that they circle each other. And it also controls the spin and the way that they hit the ground. So you can see here that these spheres don't actually have that much animation on them. Of course, it is animated, it is considered, but it doesn't have as much animation as you think. And if I turn on the trajectories now, you can see what we have going on here. It doesn't really look like much. So let's undo that and put those back in the group. And then look at how the trajectory has changed for this one here. Of course, this is the early iteration and I've, you know, heavily edited it since then. But you can see now that when you bring them together and you have this control here controlling most of the rotations, it allows you to have that. Then when it comes to the part where the dragons are circling around, so that they can keep like a relatively equal distance to each other, all I've done is I've grabbed this control here and I've just rotated it like that. So if I open up my graph editor, hold on, it should be this one here. And I'll bring this on this side so you can see it. If you look at my rotation Y, look at there, that's rotation Y, you can see that this is what it looks like. So when they're going to go for the circling, you see you got all this massive rotation. So it starts off at 50 and ends up at, 210, put simply. So it's a way of easily controlling the rotations while having control over what everything looks like and not losing control of the rigs eventually when you attach them to the spheres, and then you avoid gimbal lock. That's how I've gone about doing that. So you can see that I have that going on there. I've added a little bit of, settle by adding some, rotation here, because when I rotate them like that, it's gonna, whoops, hold on. I'm getting some lag there. So, yep. So you can see it will just wobble up and down like that. And then you offset that by, adding some up and down animation on these spheres here. So then what ends up happening, you get something like that. where that's how they settle into the air, and then they're going to circle, and then they can clash and come down here, and that's that. That's quite literally how I've gone about creating that. So then the next step from that point was to basically attach the dragons themselves to their relative spheres. But to demonstrate that a little better, I'm going to open up another Maya file. See here that basically these spheres, they just work as a guide so that you can get the kind of motion that you're looking for. You don't need to keep them with the spheres one for one, but they're going to serve as a guide to basically maintain the action. And what I like to do is I don't want to constrain myself to the spheres completely. So I haven't just grabbed the master control for this, like this here. Was that the right one? No, it was this one. Sorry, let me grab it from here. It's been a while since I've worked on these files. So yeah, this is the main control that's going to just allow you to manipulate the entire rig. So what I've done, as you can see, I've got keys here and quite a few of them. And what I've done is I've basically aligned this to this sphere throughout the entire motion. And that's how I got the basis of the animation done. And there's a tool inside of Animbot called Xforms, where you basically, here's how it works. If you grab this control here, which is the rig, and then you grab the sphere, what you can do, if you click on this button here, this little chain icon down here, it says Xforms copied. And what that does is that copies the relationship between the two objects that you have selected, meaning that if I was to go ahead and go down here, and I was to go over here, right click on it, click on this, and I go paste Xform relationship, notice how the rig itself has snapped to where the sphere is. So what I've done is I've gone through that, and I've done it throughout the entire animation. So if you drag select everything, you can basically paste Xform relationship. It's going to do on every single one of the keys that you have. So as you can see, I've got them in like almost like 5 frame intervals, and all I did to do that was just use a tool that I have basically, which is a keyframe reduction tool. What it really does is it takes whatever control you have selected and it pastes keys on whatever interval that you set. So if I said 1 and I clicked on paste, see like it's baked keys on every single frame. So if I just undo that and I turn on my graph editor here, you can see that it doesn't just do it for one axis, it does it for everything. So you can see here it's basically baked everything down. So let me undo that. And if I decided that I wanted to have it on 5 frame intervals, which I've got here, I've done that. There you go, 5 frame intervals. And then I go through and I've just deleted what I need and what I don't need. And I've just gone through it like that. And that's going to allow me to have the basis movement for both of the dragons. Of course, you can see that at this point in the animation, I've gone a little bit further so that the actual dragon control here is a little bit further than where the sphere is. So like you can see that the pivot points don't exactly match 100% because all I've done is use these spheres to get the initial movement. And then once I've done that, I can start working out like, okay, now I need to, you know, make it a little bit different here. I need to push them a little bit further here, etc, etc, etc. When it comes to like framing and cameras and stuff, I used several things as reference. I think the main thing that I used was Game of Thrones. And let me show you what is that I mean. So if we go to the very first one, like the final shot, you can see that I kind of got this intro thing going on here. I've got the dragon like roaring and coming across screen. That's just basic acting, but that didn't come from nowhere. Before I started this, I was recently watching Game of Thrones, and then yeah, there's something that came to me and I just thought that was really cool to, you know, add to my scene. So let me pull that up. One moment. Where are you? There we go, reference. So if you look at this one here called Dragon Roar reference, this scene is just from Game of Thrones. I think it's season 5. So you can see here, like, you know, you've got the dragon swooping in and you've got like this kind of acting here. It's just basically where the dragons are going to go burn these ships. But I thought that was really cool. So I decided to do something similar, but add my own spin on it. So when you compare that to this, it's similar, but it's not the same. Cool. So I've explained the general methodology of how I've gone about, you know, the initial setup and basically blocking out the motion. But I haven't explained about how I've managed to, you know, understand the mechanics of these wings and get that down right as well. So that's what we're going to do right now. over the years, I've always wanted to create dragon animations. It's always been one of the things that I've just adored about animation, and it's just inspired me from I was able to animate, and it's only as of recently that I'm able to animate dragons in a believable way. And the thing that changed things for me was understanding the mechanics of wings and the way that they work. So when we break down the anatomy of a dragon and its wings, they're more so similar to bats. What they are is essentially they're lizards with bat wings. That's ultimately what they are. Lizards with bat wings with basically legs of a chicken. That is essentially what they are. So when we look at basically flying cycle reference, we can see here that, Pinterest has got some really good examples of the way that bats wing mechanics work. And if you want to take it a step further, you can even go on to where is it again? What was the site called? So then there's this resource is invaluable for understanding flying mechanics. This guy Brendan has broken down flying mechanics for anybody to understand, and having a good read through this, watching the videos, looking at the examples, breaks down everything that you need to know in terms of flight mechanics and just wing movement in general. Looking at this and then studying the Game of Thrones reference and just the wing shapes that dragons make, you can see that, okay, based on their anatomy and the design, they're very similar to bats. But there's one problem with bat wing animation, is that when you animate the wings to be like a bat, you're unable to portray or get the feeling of weight, because the way that the creature flaps, it doesn't accommodate for an elongated body. So as you know, with dragons, they have elongated bodies, that they got long tails, they have long torsos, and then they have long necks. So when you apply that wing animation to a dragon, it ultimately feels like the wings are weightless. So you need to start adding the principles of weight to your wing flaps. And how do you do that? So what does the principles of weight even mean? So the principles of weight, the way that I like to see them, is that when you have something that has a lot of mass or is very heavy, its movements are slow and deliberate. But at the same time, this is a bit complicated because a dragon is also, one is very heavy, and if its wings are going to be slow and deliberate, how is it that it's able to maintain lift? So what that means is that when you're creating your wing flaps, you have to exaggerate all of the movements. So let me go to the final animation to show you what it is that I'm talking about, because that's the best way that you're going to get it. So like I mentioned before, it's very difficult to make the wings feel like they've got enough air trapped in them to support the dragon's weight. So one thing that you're going to need to do is you need to exaggerate all of the wing flaps and then making them feel slow and deliberate. So the way that you're going to do that is you're going to exaggerate the poses. So truth be told, if you look at this pose right here, this wing flap doesn't work because it's too flexible here. But in the context of the animation and the angle that I had it at in terms of the camera, it works visually. And you need to exaggerate those wing flaps, exaggerate the poses of them, because if you don't, what's going to end up happening is that your dragon is not going to feel like it's believably carrying itself through the air. The next thing that you need to focus on is getting adequate, basically, reaction with the body in proportion to wing flaps or in relation to the wing flaps. And I think the best example of that I can give is when the dragons separate and they begin hovering in the air. So let's have a look here. What we have here is we have this dragon flying back. And then what is going to help sell this is that as the wings come down and you're going on the downstroke and you've got the air, you trapped it here and you're pushing the air out from underneath you. In fact, let me draw over this so it's actually easier to illustrate. So let's go through. So imagine dragon separates, and then as the wings are coming down, what's really happening is that you're trapping air underneath here, underneath the wings, and you're creating turbulence here like this. The air is getting trapped underneath. And then as we go through, as we go through here, what's happening now is that the same air is being pushed out there and there. So let me clear these ones up. So like I said, the same air is being pushed out from underneath here like that there, and underneath here like that there. And that is going to allow the body to stay upwards. And then the thing that you need to remember is that this thing has a lot of weight. So as the body gets pushed upwards, you want to have it drag behind a little bit. So you can see here that as the wings have come down, notice how the body here, the legs are going down, and then shortly afterwards, they go up. So there's a little bit of a delay and a drag in the reaction of the body in relation to the wing flaps. And what that does, it allows the dragon to feel like it's got a lot of weight and it's carrying a lot of mass, and it makes the flaps feel believable. So that's something that you need to bear in mind that you're doing as well when you're creating these dragon wing flap animations. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you get in the correct poses, because it's very easy to get the wrong pose. And I had to look at reference for this. So for example, when I'm looking at the upstroke, and for those of you who don't know, the upstroke is referring to the point where the wings are traveling upwards. So where it's coming here, it's going up here. That's the upstroke. Downstroke here, like this. So when it's going down like this direction, so here like this, it's going down like that. That's the downstroke. And then when it's going, you know, up like that, that's the upstroke. It's going up like that. It's the upstroke. And you just need to go ahead, look at reference, and then you can understand exactly how bat wings move. Because a lot of people think that when it comes to wings, that you just want to make them flap through the air like just by rotating up and down. Like, no, that's how you block them out. But there's a lot of things that you need to consider in terms of, like, you know, the way that the wings actually rotate to generate the lift. And that's something that you need to get by studying the actual reference and how bats and birds move. So let me show you what that looks like on Pinterest really quick. You can see from the example here that the way that it moves, the wings are actually pushing forward. They don't just fly up and down. And that circling forward, what's happening is that the wings are actually rotating down and catching the air. So I think I need to pull up an actual slow-mo clip of a bat actually flying through the air. So let's do that. Just write this out here. Now let's pay attention to what the bat's doing. Look at the way that the wings are flowing and they're pushing forward. Then the membrane folds forward, as you can see. So let's do that. Let's press play. Come on. Look at that. Look how the membrane folds forward there to catch the air. And that's what you need to replicate in your animation. And that's what I've done in mine as well. So if I was to just grab this marker here, like this, and I was to grab that. Pen, please. You can see here that that's the wing hand, but the wing fingers are down here like that, and they're even starting to bend forward a little bit. So it's like that, and then this one here is going to stay back here because that's just due to anatomy. So when we go back to our animation now, we need to replicate the same kind of grabbing and sweeping the air motion in our own motions. Otherwise, it's just not going to feel believable. So let's have a look here. When we go back to the beginning of the animation, whoops, let's get everything in frame. Let me use my mouse for this. There we go. Which one was it? There we go, this one. So we go back to the beginning of the motion. You can see here that the way I've got the wings folding. Of course, I've got them angled to basically look better in the camera. But if you look at this here, look at how I've got the wings folding. So you can see that from this angle here, from the side, the air is being trapped and then swooped underneath to slow itself down in anticipation for the clash. So if I was to draw this as, like, you know, hold on. There it is. There we go. So if I was to draw this, here we go. You can see that I've got the wind here basically being trapped underneath here and like this. So it's going to hit this and just circle round. Hit here, hit turbulence, just circle round. So essentially what's happening is it's working as air brakes with nice follow through and overlap on the wing fingers. That's going to allow it to feel believable, to slow down, to then clash and make impact with this other dragon. Because if it doesn't, it's going to cause itself some serious injury. And then when it comes to, you're basically treating this impact as what a dragon would do when it's landing, or what a bird would do when it's landing. It's going to start flapping its wings faster in order to slow itself down so that it doesn't injure itself. And it's the same principle here. And then when it comes to the actual flying part of it itself, so more specifically the hovering part where they separate, so let me not use the pen, where they separate here, getting the adequate wing shapes is very important. And I did that by studying the reference from bats, birds, and Game of Thrones as well. So when I look at the upstroke, you see here that the upstroke looks very extreme. So if you look at it from this angle, Like the upstroke is very extreme. Why does it need to be that extreme? Because like I said, when it comes to large creatures like this, the wing movements need to be slow and deliberate, because if they're not, you're not going to create a convincing animation. So let me show you an example of that, of how they've nailed it in Game of Thrones. So this, not Game of Thrones, this is actually House of the Dragon. So it's actually one of the very first scenes in one of the first episodes where the dragon, Cyrax, I believe it is, flies into the scene with Rhaenyra on its back. Look at the wing flaps. Look how exaggerated and extreme they are. How slow, thought out and deliberate that they are to maintain believability. And then when it wants to have different levels of control and not produce as much lift, notice how the wing flaps aren't as exaggerated. And then it's going between gliding through the air and then adding little gentler flaps just to maintain the height and the motion. So when my dragons now want to push themselves back and suddenly stop themselves in the air and maintain a certain height in the air, they need to have a consistent flapping motion in order to maintain adequate lift. And that's what I basically learned from studying Game of Thrones. In this case, House of the Dragon. So if you just look at that, and then we go to more dragon flap reference, and this is actually in Game of Thrones. So just look at the way that these dragons are flying. Look at the exaggerated wing flaps. Like if you just look at them, when you get to the upstroke, look how high and extreme that is over here. Let me get a pen and draw over that because the image quality isn't so great. See here, if this was the wing shoulder, sorry, undo that, it's the wrong place. It ends up being somewhere like there. That's the elbow. The wing hand will end up being somewhere like here. And then from that point onwards, you're getting the wing fingers come off and around here like that. And then this one's going to come up here like that. And that's why you can see it bend off. There's another one here that does that. And then there's obviously one here that does that, but that's going to be hiding that there. So what you end up getting is a shape that looks like this, like that. And obviously that part comes down there. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the wing shape is meant to look like. So from the front, it ends up looking something like this. So let's say that's the shoulder, then that's the elbow of the wing, then right there is the hand of the wing, and you're going to have the same thing come up here like this here, and then you're going to get the wing fingers branch off from there like that. And then you're going to get the same thing happen with more or less all of them. Then like that there. Probably going to end up even having one over here as well, because you usually have more wing fingers than that. But yeah, you get the idea that the premise of it is that you're going to end up with something like this. And obviously the wing fingers, different ones are longer than the other. And what you end up with is with a shape that's like, basically like this. So then you want to translate that kind of pose to your own animation. And then when you hit those kind of poses, and then you just want to make sure that you've got adequate follow through and overlap on the wing fingers. And that's how you're going to create that nice, beautiful wing flapping motion that feels nice, fluid, and believable. So let's go back to this. And you can see here, I've got that same shape happening here, like where it curves up like that. And notice how with my wing fingers, they're always dragging behind. They're always late to the party. And what that does, it always allows it to feel like there's some resistance and it's catching the air. And then in terms of polish, what I like to do as well is I've added basically some motion to the membranes. So when the wings are coming down, notice how the membrane bellows outwards like this. Of course, I could exaggerate it more, but you don't want to go too far. And then when it goes up, you do the inverse. So you can see here, you can see that this is sucked inwards. Let's get the angle right. So you can see here that it's sucked inwards, where really before it was like that, but this time on the way up it's sucked inwards. You can see the indent of the wing fingers. What that does, it always allows it to feel like it's interacting with the air, and it's going to just allow you to create a really convincing wing flap. And that's how I've managed to get that working like that. And the same with the other dragon as well. So if I go back here, go over here, same thing with that one. It's the exact same thing. And that's how you create these lovely wing flaps, and you have the weight of the body basically always delaying and sagging behind the actual wing flaps itself. That's how you create a sense of weight and a sense of believability with these wing flaps. It's something that takes a lot of time. There's no quick way of going about it. It just takes time, it takes practice, it takes study, and it takes research. But once you've got that down, you will have an incredible animation. You really, really will. Once you take those principles and then you apply them, what you end up having is that you end up having an animation like this, where the dragons come together. We already know how we're going to deal with the rotations, and then all we do is we add some more wing flaps here just to make it seem and feel believable that they're actually fighting in the air. Then in terms of them separating, I've had to have this dragon kick off of this one, but because of how I've got it, it seems quite deformed, especially on this frame. Don't worry about that, it's not really important. All that really matters is that you get the shapes right there, and it feels like it's actually kicking off of that one. And then adding some acting there, which is just going to be like, things like adding the roaring that's happening right there. So let me zoom in. It'll be easy if I do this. There we go. So now let's do that. Yeah, so you got that going on there. Just some raw for some acting. This one does the same thing. And then I mentioned it before about how these are going to fall around in the circle, basically based on the sphere, because that was basically controlling all the rotations. But obviously I've baked it down now, just so I can have the luxury of having extra control myself, and I don't have to worry about gimbal lock. And it's the same thing what's happening here, is that when the wings are coming together now, I didn't want to have the wings be flapping on this second clash. The reason why is because I want them to tumble towards the ground, and if I have them flapping, then it means that it creates the illusion that they're going to, basically try to maintain some sort of height. Even though the momentum is going to carry them down, what's going to naturally happen is that they end up stabilizing themselves within the air. So that's why you can see here from during this first clash, I've got the wings flapping to make that sense of, they're going upwards and they're maintaining their height within the air, or the lift rather, believable. And on the second clash, what happens is that they basically ball themselves up to protect themselves, because they're basically using their arms to brace for impact while they're trying to attack each other at the same time. And when you've got that, then it's just a case of adding little details. So little things here, like where I've had the orange dragon, because this is the orange one, swoop around and up, and you see like I've had his body compress right here and then extend here to make the impacts feel better. So that's just basically squash and stretch. So you can see here that even in a complex animation like this, the animation principles absolutely apply. It's very important that you add them. And then with this dragon here, I've made him this one here, I've made him basically use his wings as air brakes to work in anticipation for that impact here. And as you see here, it's a little detail, it's very subtle, but if I go through, let me just grab something here. If I go through frame by frame, you'll notice what happens is that this dragon here is just a little detail. It actually goes to bite this one, but it misses as he does the impacts, because this one moves his head out of the way. It moves his head out of the way, and then it's going to latch on eventually. Oh yeah, that's it. They pull their heads back in anticipation to bite each other again while they tumble into the ground, and the eventually blue one ends up biting the other one biting this one on its neck. Yeah, so we're just adding those little acting details as well. And I didn't have any particular reference for this. I just thought it was like, really cool acting to have them try to bite each other and claw at each other and scratch each other like mid-air. I thought it was something that would be really cool. I guess if I was really thinking about it, if I go back to the Pixmodo fight, or that animation rather, you can see that they've got stuff like that going on here, where they've got like wing flaps, giant ball of pain, and this one, like, they're scratching each other, they're trying to bite at each other. So there's acting that's happening in the air. So I guess if you really want to say, I got some of the reference and some of my inspiration and ideas from this particular scene as well. Even though at the time when I was making it, I didn't think about it, but it's probably something that I ended up just doing subconsciously, like referring to that reference in my own mind. And then when it came to the impact landing on the ground, hold on, let me turn that the right way around. I just basically used the bouncing ball as an analogy to, or as a method of understanding that the way that these two beasts would interact with the ground when they hit it, because what they're doing, they're tumbling to the ground as basically two giant balls of pain. And because I had that figured out from the layout scene, that has allowed me to translate that to these dragons here. But what I wanted to do is I wanted one dragon to be the clear victor and not both of them just to be tumbled to the ground and essentially die. So I had to make sure that One hits the ground really hard. So let's bring that into frame. One hits the ground very hard like that. And you can see here that the tail is reacting, the head is reacting. And then what's gonna, actually let me put in a ground, so I deleted it for the sake of this video. Let me go, there we go. All right, so now we can see the ground. We're gonna get to the part where they both hit the ground. Let's turn that off. Yeah, I just had this one react and hit the ground, so you can see here I've got the head flowing upwards like that. Scream out in pain. Head hits the floor. Wings settle as well. That's it. And yeah, that was basically it. And then when it comes to this dragon, and this is actually the main reason why I had the wings in IK for this dragon, because I knew that I wanted him to rotate around, flip up, and then place his wings on the ground here, and then basically go for this, you know, this final roar that you see in the end of the clip. So let's go here. Yeah, that's basically that. I just wanted to make sure that I was able to actually have these wings be planted on the floor. And then just a little detail as well, because I see a lot of animators get this wrong as well. Like when it comes to creatures like this, like stamping their feet, what you want is when it impacts on the ground, you want to have it spread outwards. Because what that does is basically works as think of it like a bag filled with water. And then when you hold the bag by the handles and you place the bag on the table by still holding it, notice how the bag is going to spread out. Think of the toes and the feet like that, like bags of water being spread out to absorb the weight and the impact. And then after that, it's of course just adding little details, like you know, vibrations inside of here, because you know this rig has the controls to allow you to do that. And then just going through and adding some, you know, polish and detail. When it comes to polish and detail, there's something I haven't touched on, because as you can imagine, if you play through the scene from beginning to end, you can see, give Maya a second to react, you can see it's quite a complicated scene, and polishing it is very easy to get lost. So what do? What you do is you want to break down the scene into sections, and again, Animbot has this really cool feature where you can divide your timeline into sections. So what I would do is once I've blocked out the animation and then given it a second pass to the point where I don't see anything anymore, I break the timeline down into different sections. So you see here, I got from frame 0 to 55 is the intro. So if I just go to frame 55 here, and then I go here, I just zero in and I focus on this animation. So you notice that I don't have this dragon moving. The reason I don't have this dragon moving is I've already decided early on for my camera framing that I'm going to be following this one. So with that in mind, from this point onwards, I'm really just polishing this one, and I'm only polishing this one when it actually gets into the frame. Then we move on to the next section, which is basically the separation. So from frame 55 all the way to, I believe it's 130 or something like that. Oh, 115, that was it. It's been a while. So yeah, to 115 is basically going to be this giant ball section where they flap and they do that. So again, I'll just take in this section here and polishing it up to there. I take this section as far as I can go. And in case you're wondering, okay, you're polishing it section by section, but how do you make sure that the different sections link up properly so it doesn't feel like there's nasty snaps in the animation? What you end up doing is you end up making the last pose of this section influence what happens next. So let's say from here, from this point onwards, you have the next section flow into it. So as you're polishing it, that's how you take care of it. You just make sure that, you know, the poses match. It's kind of like making poses match in like video game animation. Like you need to make one, like the end pose of an attack 1 link into the second attack, otherwise it won't link properly. And it's the same principle here, just making sure that the poses link up like that. And you got the flying section here, same principle. And then finally going into here, into the dive bomb / finish, and that's that. And that's basically everything when it comes to this dragon animation. Of course, I don't think there's anything I haven't covered. Oh yes. I've covered the wing animation, I've covered basically the general body. How do you know what to do with the tail? The tail, when it comes to flying creatures or just creatures that have this kind of tail with this kind of mass, what you don't want to do is you don't want to have the tail be too loose, because I find that I see that a lot of animators do that, especially more junior ones, that the tail feels almost rubbery. I can tell that all they've done is basically throw a simulation on it, and you don't want to do that. You actually want to control the actual motion of it. So of course you want it to be flowy, you want it to feel natural, but at the same time, the purpose of the tail is to work as a counterbalance to the actual creature's basically weight and body. Because if you look, the tail makes up pretty much the length of half of the body. So it works as a stabilization tool, and it works as a way of manipulating itself to steer its body in the right direction while in flight. So you want to bear that in mind. And the best way to think about doing that is to basically apply the concept of follow through and overlap. And you can see here, so for example, when we have the dragon separate, you see here I've got the tail be the last thing that comes here, and then it flicks upwards there, and then it comes back round down here to stabilize itself, so that it can end up propelling itself this way over here. So that's how I go about using the tail. Basically, I use the tail as a counterbalance, and it's something that you want to do within your animation as well. And that is basically it when it comes to the dragon battle animation. So if we just go into the camera view, and we go over here, panels, perspective, action camera. So if we just go through and we just play the animation now, you can see this is the final result of what I ended up getting. And then when it comes to actually animating it, and then when it comes to actually making the shot look really, really nice, I passed this on to my VFX partners at Planion Animation Studios. I worked with them to make the shot look the absolute best that it can, and sometimes that meant tweaking the animation a little bit further, which is completely fine, it's completely natural, and then the final result that you end up getting after spending all of that time is this. And that concludes the Dragon Battle Animation Masterclass. This masterclass has successfully elevated your skills and taken your skill set to the next level. And now you're going to be in a position where you can have jobs come to you. All you need to do now is put in the work and show it. So now that you have those skills, apply them to make convincing animations. With all that being said, I actually want to give you guys a special offer. As part of completing this course, I want to offer you a discount on my creature animation course, where you can learn more about the body mechanics of dragons and various other creatures to elevate your creature animation game to the next level as well. If you enjoyed this class, I recommend that you take advantage of it and use the code that you see pop up on screen right now at checkout. Honestly, this is a deal of the century. You don't want to miss out on this, because the learning opportunities that you're going to get from taking part of my creature animation course after taking part of this animation masterclass, you're going to really make yourself stand out in the animation industry. You're going to really make yourself stand out, and you're going to be the talk of the town, and you're going to be the person that everybody wants to hire for their studio. Anyways, that's all I have for this class. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to working with you in the future. It's been a pleasure, and until next time, take care.